House of the Dragon, better known as the HotD, is finally back, and so are all the bingo prediction fun times. If you were following along this week, well, hitting a bingo was admittedly pretty easy. Right up front, I have read the books, but I won't be talking about any of the upcoming events of the season. For those of you who don't know, Fire and Blood isn't a novel, it's effectively an in-universe history book drafted from multiple different perspectives. Many of them are often either incomplete or extremely skewed toward one side because politics. So even for book readers, there is still a ton to look forward to because we don't actually know the full story. But before I get to said story, I absolutely want to talk about the new opening. As a certified Attack on Titan Season 2 ED enjoyer, I can definitely say that this one is equally cool. The opening itself is essentially just Helena's prophecy from Season 1. Hand turn loom, spool of green, spool of black, dragons of flesh, weaving dragons of thread. Green and black is obviously just Team Green and Team Black, the Hightowers and the Targaryens. And the hand spinning the loom is just people weaving the threads of history in fire and blood. In this dance of dragons, every single thread will be drenched in blood. And so as we see Aegon on the Iron Throne and Rhaenyra in Dragonstone, behind both, blood seeps through. Another thing to note is a bunch of the old Valyria imagery we see in this one. For all of you non-book folk, the Thrones TV series removed a ton of the magical side of A Song of Ice and Fire. The books have plenty of conversations about blood magic, its connections to dragons, and how all of those dark arts might have caused the mysterious doom of Valyria. So it's just really cool to see that represented here too. And those final shots of the still empty tapestry leading to the Iron Throne just very bluntly shows us that while Aegon might be on the throne today, we are still yet to see what history says of it. I'm sure people will be picking apart this intro sequence for a very long time, and if it keeps changing as we saw with Season 1, then there's probably going to be a whole lot more foreshadowy scenes in here too. As for the episode itself, we first see Winterfell, where I think two crucial things are established. First of all, there is that whole theme of duty versus love. Right from the get-go, we open with the Starks talking about how one of their family were sent to the Wall to reinforce the Watch. It is an oath that transcends any sort of family, any sort of loyalties, because there is something much bigger. Which very nicely connects to point number 2, reinforcing the prophecy that are the White Walkers. Unlike Game of Thrones, where that statement of winter is coming and winter is here was this omnipresent threat, House of the Dragon, as the name sort of suggests, more so deals with the house. It deals with these human conflicts where, at the end of the day, everyone loses. The war we're about to see is a result of human pride. Viserys wanted to prepare the realm for exactly this. He told Rhaenyra the prophecy. But just like with a lot of Game of Thrones, with a lot of these prophecies, there is a chosen one, and in everyone's mind, they are the chosen one. So I think Season 2 opening with what was actually important, only to completely disregard that and zoom in on the purely vengeful conflict that would be Rhaenyra's a son for a son, perfectly lays the groundwork for this upcoming conflict. Viserys' warnings of a united realm are long forgotten. Now, it is an eye for an eye until the world is blind. And one thing that I really love here is how they keep bringing up the threats of dragons. In Game of Thrones, whenever dragons were mentioned, it was just Dany, right? There really wasn't anything more to it. But with House of the Dragon, we are actually going to see dragons fighting other dragons. These battles are going to be like nothing we've ever seen before, so the threat constantly being brought up, I think is again very neatly establishing the actual stakes of what we're about to get into. And very fittingly, we then bounce around between a few different locations to see exactly this. And actually, before I start naming all the characters, I need to just put a warning right here at the start. We all know that the Game of Thrones family trees and the names are ridiculous and impossible to remember, right? Well, yeah, that problem gets even worse when I'm reading things off of a script. I don't know what happens, I might call Daemon, Demon, I don't know. Just don't roast me too much, you're probably gonna get what I mean. Whenever I'm recording, I have like a -20 intellect debuff. But yes, with everyone, we just see like different forms of paranoia and different forms of just tensions rising. Rhaenys talks about how she's been patrolling all the time, while Daemon just says, no, get back on your dragon, let's go to King's Landing and just pop off. And at the same time, in King's Landing, we also see exactly this. Scorpions are being prepared, every single dragon is being called out, and generally, they just know that at any moment, someone could swoop in. And on top of the very explicit dragon threat, there is also the constant question of what is Daemon really doing? Is this drive actually loyalty toward Rhaenyra, or is it just his own selfish ambition? Is him telling Rhaenys that she could have killed Aegon and that it's because of her that Luke is dead just sort of weird projection on his part? Or is this really just a case of him realizing that we are at a boiling point and he's just going to strike first? Well, technically it wouldn't be striking first, but you get what I mean. But continuing on that feeling of just constant paranoia, Alicent is dealing with it in a bit of a steamy way. Jokes aside though, we'll return to this point in just a minute because I think it very neatly parallels Rhaenyra as well. And not just because of, you know. But of course the best example of that paranoia is none other than Elena.
I'm afraid. Not the dragons. The rats.
I think her character exists in this very interesting place between prophecies that are sort of so vague that you can never really trust them, sort of like we see in Thrones, but also her random yapping being 100% true. Usually Martin plays around with the idea that it's not safe to trust prophecies and that you might fulfill them yourself and therefore it sort of becomes this curse, yada yada. Then with her, it's the complete opposite. No one listens to her and she sort of knows what's going to happen. Despite what we saw in Winterfell, despite Rhaenys' patrolling, despite the scorpion bolts, she says, no, it's not the dragons, it's the rats. And big surprise, the person who would actually be a threat to her family is the dude claiming to be after the rats. And because this is Game of Thrones, I think it also carries the double meaning of not being just in relation to blood and cheese, but more so this general idea of there always being rats within the walls. Like we'd see at the end of this episode, and like we'd see many times in Thrones, even when you think you're alone, there is always someone listening. There are always people sneaking around and scheming. And in many ways, that unseen dagger can be infinitely more dangerous than a dragon just swooping overhead. So yeah, all in all, just a really cool collection of scenes to 1. Establish the danger of dragons, but 2. Also plant the idea at the back of our minds that we don't necessarily need to take out dragons. We can take out dragon riders, we can take out other people, there's a bunch of different things that we could do, none of which necessarily need a full-on assault. And this is of course also happening on the other side with Larys talking about this whole spy master stuff. But before we move on, I do have one very big problem with this episode, and that is the fact that we never saw the actual aftermath of Luke's death. We opened this episode with everyone already grieving, everyone prepping for war, and generally things being bad. But we never actually get those moments of characters reacting to what has happened. There is that tiny bit at the end of Season 1, and that tiny bit at the start of Season 2, but I think there should have been a bit more in between. Personally, I think lines like, "You only lost one eye, how could you be so blind?" should have definitely been adapted. Instead, we kinda jump over all of that, and the ramifications of what has actually happened are not really explored that much. HBO is obviously investing very heavily into this show, so it seems kind of odd that a bunch of these things are kinda rushed, just like we saw with Season 1. Aemond is a kinslayer, and in this universe, that is a huge deal. Not just that, this was not an act of war. Both of them were emissaries, so what does that signal to the rest of the world? And on top of all of that, I think the angle of dragons, just like Viserys warned, not being controllable is another thing that we definitely should have explored a bit more. He played with fire, and someone got really badly burnt. And by burnt, I mean like literally chomped apart. But what I'm getting at is that I think that angle of him actually being held responsible in one way or another should have been explored a bit more. That aside though, another cool little juxtaposition we see here is Aegon's small council versus Rhaenyra's. With Aegon, we of course have the scene of him coming with Jaehaerys, which first of all is just very cute and also very sad because, you know. But secondly, I think it just depicts his carelessness about this whole thing. Just like Rhaenys said earlier in the episode, she'd do what Daemon said if he were king. Well, the problem is, Aegon is king, but he literally doesn't care about like anything going on. His small council right now is kinda daycare and Jaehaerys is just messing with the ball. The rest of his council is of course in full-on manage mode, they want to de-escalate the situation. But on the other side of this entire conflict, we have Rhaenyra, who just walks in and says,
"I want Aemond Targaryen."
Thus far, she had been the one trying to de-escalate the situation. From her point of view, Alicent and Otto basically overthrew the entire succession, they overthrew Viserys' wishes and put Aegon on the throne. But even so, while they were definitely amassing their armies, Rhaenyra never wanted to escalate to actually full-blown war. Now on the other hand, the Green Council is scrambling for some sort of resolution that doesn't involve just going to war right now. Again, whether he wanted to or not, Aemond killed Luke. That is all that matters here, and for Rhaenyra, that marks the end of these negotiations. It's just a really neat way to sort of flip the Season 1 narrative as to who is on the defensive and who is now on the offense. A lot of the time, we saw Daemon wanting to do things but always being held back. Well now, he will sorta be unleashed. But one thing to mention regarding Rhaenyra and Alicent is that I think Alicent too definitely regrets what happened. And not like in a, oh no we've started a war way, but actually feeling bad for Luke's death, like she didn't want this. I think the bath scene actually demonstrates that very well, like her washing herself, it's paranoia and she feels unclean. But at the same time, she is also massively hypocritical. She is hooking up with Criston Cole, you know, the same thing she accused Rhaenyra of. So as with a lot of George's stories, you have this bizarre situation where she is sort of feeling bad, but at the same time you're kind of like, well, yeah, but what did you expect? And all of that, of course, loops back to Viserys' prophecy. Misinterpreting that because of human pride is the thing that started this. And the final thing in this episode is of course Daemon donning his murder cloak, so you know what's gonna happen. I mean, yeah, this whole scene was just horrifying. I have already seen talks of whether or not the book version was actually better. And I guess before I talk about that, let me really quickly recap the book version. So in the book, she actually has 2 sons and a daughter. In the show, despite her other son seemingly also being in the show, he's never actually appeared and he's never really brought up, so supposedly he doesn't exist. But yes, in the book, she is forced to choose which one of her sons dies. Then, Blood and Cheese turns to the one that she didn't choose, says, see, your mother doesn't love you, and they spare that one. So, yeah, in terms of just like being the most twisted thing you can come up with, is definitely that. Personally though, yeah, I do think the book's version is definitely a whole lot darker, but for the purposes of the story, I think this one definitely gets the message across. There is of course the dimension of having multiple successors and everything like that, but the show is clearly taking a different turn on that. So point being that, from a direction standpoint, from a just being horrifying perspective, I think the entire sequence was absolutely excellent and is sort of the thing you come to Game of Thrones for. It's like the most twisted, uncalled for, absolutely gut-wrenching thing that just comes out of the blue and no one's even fighting and you're just like, man, this is gonna be pretty bad, isn't it? And the sound design in this sequence was also just like, man, like usually, I really don't care about violence in television and games, I really don't. Like to me it means nothing, none of it is real. But for just a second, and by the way, I watch these things with breakfast. I wake up and I watch these shows. I was kind of like, yeah, you know what, I think I'm gonna wait for the sequence to end before I continue eating. It was really bad, and that's what makes it great. It should be brutal, it should be absolutely, I don't even know, spine-chilling. I know a lot of people say that, like, this brutality isn't necessary for the story, but personally, I very much disagree. I'm not talking about, like, needless gore and blood and everything like that. I'm more so talking about just how far people will go for the thing they want. At the heart of Game of Thrones, there is just human conflict and how horrible people can really be. Full-blown war is one of those things that is, I don't want to call it romanticized, but we sort of view it through almost a film perspective, if that makes sense. It's this grand thing where everything is firing off on all cylinders, there are hundreds of people dying, and so none of it really means anything because it's like 1,000 people is a statistic, right? But scenes like this, oh boy, this grounds us immediately. This is not 100 dudes being burned. This is just one innocent kid, and when you look back at that scene in Aegon's small council, oh boy. They're also still doing the whole twins that can't be told apart thing we saw with Cersei and Jaime, and what that means for kings and queens. The entire dimension of queens that never were, because patriarchy, versus kings that never were, because, you know, they were the first heir and were deliberately killed, was always a really interesting thing to explore in the series. So with the likes of Rhaenyra and Rhaenys, I really hope we continue to explore that side of this world as well. But just to take a step back for a moment, remember that Jaehaerys was never the target. The target was Aemond. And when you go back to those scenes of Daemon talking to Blood and Cheese, well, we never really see the whole thing through. So the natural question that arises is, did he tell them to just like go after anyone? Aemond is a kinslayer. No matter how brutal it may sound, going after him is perfectly justified in this situation. But just telling them to kill someone? That's a whole different story. I think this dynamic between Rhaenyra sort of being unchained and actually just saying that yes, let's go after them, and Daemon actually saying, you know what, I will, and doing something very shady will be very interesting to see. I think with them, there is always this really interesting dynamic of Rhaenyra wanting like a level 1 conflict, while then Daemon wants a level 2. Rhaenyra finally comes around and says, okay, let's go to level 2, and he's like, no, let's go to level 3. And so now, after a long time of Daemon yapping about going to war like right now, Rhaenyra is now at that level of let's go to war. So what is the next thing he's gonna cook up? I think we've all seen the trailer, and I think we all know that the Green Council will also respond to this. Things are about to get really bad, and Viserys' prophecy, well, that will be forgotten for a little while. A son for a son until the lineage is dead, an eye for an eye until the world is blind. That is kind of the ethos of this series. But yes, those are my very chaotic, not at all thought out thoughts on the first episode. I wasn't going to make a video on it, but I watched it and it was like really good. I've been meaning to create retrospective content on both Game of Thrones as well as House of the Dragon for like forever now. So maybe this will finally be the thing that actually gets me to write out scripts. If you want to see more, definitely let me know, but I am very much strapped in for season 2, it's gonna be so much fun. And I guess the last thing, I want to pass off this question to you. What did you think of the premiere? Did you like the whole blood and cheese thing? Well, as much as you can like it, I guess. Do you think we should have gotten, like, a bit more time in between Luke's death and everyone actually learning about it? Whatever your thoughts are, feel free to let me know. And that's the video. Now that season 2 of House of the Dragon is out, we should definitely be keeping an eye on George, right? Surely he's going to release Winds of Winter, like, any moment now. Okay, but seriously, there is the book event where he said that he wouldn't come back unless he finished the book, and he's going to the event this year. Surely, he has to say something about it. A release date, maybe? A teaser? Maybe another chapter? Come on, surely? This has to be the one, right? Come on. But wait, there's more, because George was also talking about, like, Alt-Shift-X. Like, come on, this has to be the year. It's gonna come out. Surely. 100%. But okay, my tinfoil times aside, with that, I want to say a massive thank you to our current patrons and YouTube members who allow me to produce even more of these for you all. And let's also give a warm welcome to the newest member of the team, Michael Melnick, I think? Without you, there'd be a whole lot less of my rambling, so seriously, thank you. Also, yes, I'm recording these videos out of order, so the Patreon screen is already updated for the Attack on Titan video, even though you haven't seen it yet, don't worry about it. Other than that, I want to say thank you very much for watching, I hope you have a great day, and hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye!